Hey, good morning, y'all. Josh's Severe Weather. Happy Friday to you. Merry Christmas to all who celebrate. Happy holidays to everyone else. Hope you guys are getting in some travel if you are, and that things go as smoothly as possible. This video, I'm going to talk about some changes coming, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about already how mild this Christmas is going to be, especially compared to this time last year when we were talking about record cold and a really disgusting blizzard for the Buffalo area and a lot of snow around the Great Lakes. This year, a complete opposite as we have milder than average weather. But I'm expecting changes coming after the first of the year. And I'm going to kind of break down why and kind of an overview of what we can expect. No one can ever tell you exactly how much snow is going to fall when you get really more past 48 hours or so. We can only kind of speculate. But my goal is not to lead anybody astray. It's just to show you what looks like it's going to change and kind of where we can expect potential snags down the road. After I talk about the long range, I'm going to back it up and just talk about the weather that we can expect here in the US and surrounding areas really in the next 4 to 5 days through Christmas and the day after. After that, I'm not really going to get into too much as the level of uncertainty is going to grow. So let me share my screen with you and welcome. Cold and snow possible as we head into January in areas that have not really seen much action really in the last couple of winters. The southern US, maybe into the southeast, even up to the mid Atlantic states. We see a change coming, and I'm going to kind of break that down for you guys. Right now, though, the amount of snow cover that we see in the northern hemisphere is very paltry, especially compared to last year when we were up in this area. Now we're kind of below the average. I'm not going to get into the snow cover extent too much, but we are actually if you're one of those people that likes snow and wants to see a white Christmas, this is going to be pretty disappointing for the majority of us here in the US. 86% of us are not going to see any kind of snow on the ground. And that puts us in record territory, in the record low territory. The most we've seen on the ground for Christmas was 63% in 2009, which interestingly was also a pretty strong El Nino winter. But this year we're not there. And I don't think we're there yet anyway. And we may not get there, to be honest with you guys. But I think things are going to gradually shift here as we head into January, and especially later in January and February, which typically are the coldest times of the year. There will be a thaw somewhere in there. I think probably towards the middle of January, maybe the third or fourth week of January, but then things should get colder again. And I do think we're going to see more active weather. This chart is probably not going to mean anything to the majority of you, so I am going to kind of break it down for you. This is the Madden-Julian oscillation. There are 8 phases to it. Typically in the United States, phases 6 and 7 are kind of mild phases where we don't really see much in the way of activity. We were there kind of towards the middle of November, and then we went over into phase 8 and 1, which are colder phases, and then we went back into milder phases in early December, and we've kind of gone full circle. Now, the closer this is to the center, the less we see kind of extreme temperature patterns. So that's something to keep in mind. Right now, here in the days leading up to Christmas time, we are in phase 8, and we're expected to shift into phase 1. This means overall, we're seeing a shift towards milder air on the West Coast and colder air in the East. We're not there yet, but we're shifting in that direction. There's typically a lag effect. So as we head past Christmas time and head through a colder phase 1, and then into the first of the year, into a phase 2, we will start to see things shifting where colder air is going to be able to get down farther to the south and east. It has been getting cold, but it's not persisted. These phases allow for more of that cold air to persist in kind of a greater depth. And as we head generally into the first and second weeks of January, while we're kind of moving out of the coldest phases, what will happen is the groundwork is set here for that cold air to dip farther down and allow more moisture to meet up with it. So I think when we're getting into phase 3 and into 4, we actually have our best shot at seeing a more southern tracked winter storm. Not in the phase 8 and 1 that people often talk about. It's going to take some time to get that to happen, especially with the fact that the ocean waters are fairly warm. So we are going to come out of these cold phases towards the middle of January. It may take a little bit of lag, but it looks like when we get towards phase 5 and 6, we are going to see somewhat of a thaw coming, probably somewhere around January 15th to 20th. With that being 4 weeks away, there will be some uncertainty, as you might imagine. So that could be a little bit sooner, a little bit later. But generally speaking, I think when we get into the start of January, and especially January 5th to 15th, we are in for a more active period where southern ice and snow can become more possible. We may actually see a better chance as we get into February. That's when I'm thinking we're probably going to have our best shot. So here's a look at the Arctic oscillation. It's positive right now, but heading gradually towards negative. This means that the coldest air currently with that positive AO is on the eastern hemispheric side, Siberia, Russia, Japan, China. But as we see it switch over, we'll see cold coming across the North Pole and a colder than average setup in the Western hemisphere here in the US and Canada. We saw a very negative AO leading up to Christmas last year and a big time cold outbreak. I don't think we're going to see big time cold, but I think we'll see more persistent cold that sticks around longer as our AO goes negative. And the time frame for that looks like it's going to be right around the 30th or 31st of the month, and more pronounced as we get to about January 5th or 6th, according to the GFS extended ensemble here. And the control is this blue line. The average is the green. I like to go more on the average side, but know that there will be some uncertainty here. And you can see that uncertainty obviously is going to grow over time. But generally speaking, the mean is below average once we get after about the 30th of December. And it sticks around like that until we get really all through the month of January. So the lack of snow cover we're seeing right now in the Western hemisphere with this AO going negative and likely staying there, or at least quite possibly staying there, then we obviously are going to see the snowpack increase and more cold coming here in the month of January. So kind of a late start to true winter here, but like those bowl games before Christmas, sometimes they're just not interesting at all until you get later into the fourth quarter. And that's kind of what we're looking at here with the weather. Not to bust out football on everybody, but just an analogy I thought would be kind of helpful. The NAO, this is the North Atlantic Oscillation. When we see it go negative, which it looks like we will, that allows for, see, it's been very positive, which means Greenland's been super cold and Canada's been super mild. As it goes negative, that flips. And when we get that kind of blocking over Greenland, we allow storm tracks to go farther south and come up the East Coast. And not only come up the East Coast, but be slower in doing so. They don't just zip off to sea. So with that negative NAO in here, again, we're seeing an ingredient that's a little more favorable for a southeast or an East Coast storm. Not a guarantee, of course, but we certainly see that better chance coming here between about January 3rd and January 15th, give or so. And the PNA, this is the Pacific North American Oscillation. It's actually going positive, which allows for colder air to come into the southeast. Then it goes back to negative, but obviously there's some back and forth on that. So this may not be as much of a factor as the other two. It's a shame if you're in the southeast and you want to see snow, and I don't assume everybody wants to see it. I know a lot of us move south for that very reason. But this is not lining up with the coldest air. So this would favor winter weather after Christmas and before New Year's in the southeast. But really, in this point, it's just favoring more active weather on the West Coast, less active weather in the southeastern United States. Here's a look graphically at what that looks like. The brighter colors indicate ridging. This is warmer than average air aloft for this time of the year, and you see a lot of ridging across the United States. Then you see the storm moving into the southwest here, heading up into the 23rd and 24th, so over this weekend. But overall, a ridge in the east does not favor any kind of significant winter weather. A trough will bring us more unsettled weather. This is a pretty significant storm moving into the southwest here that will impact the south central states right through Christmas Day. And there'll be some wintry weather as well across the central and northern plains, but not a big outbreak of cold like we saw last year. Instead, the winter weather is generated by the stronger than average cold pool aloft. So the storm itself generates the cold air, not the actual air mass source. That makes sense. But as we head later into next week, we do see this storm heading east and some colder than average air likely to be in place here across the southeast, but it will be fleeting until we get more into January here. This is the 3rd and 4th, when we see a more favorable setup here for colder air to move into the western United States and traverse the entire central and southern country. And this is what you would expect to see in a stronger El Nino, where we have below average heights here and colder than average temperatures starting to persist longer. And this time frame is going to be in about 2 weeks or so. As we get through the first weekend of January, you'll see more cold air coming into the west, some mild air across eastern Canada. This actually, believe it or not, could be a little more favorable for some sort of an East Coast storm around the 12th or 13th. But again, we're looking at a mean of all of the ensembles. This is certainly not any one model run in one particular forecast. I just look for means. And when I see something like this, then I think there's going to be a better shot at something in the southeast than what you might typically see. Interestingly, this time last year in January, we had all of this back in the West and a lot more yellow here across the eastern United States. And there's no sign of that happening anytime soon. We may see a brief thaw coming here as we get into maybe the third, fourth week of January. But I think later on in January and February, we start to see that cold taking shape again. So there may be about a week thaw where we deal with rainstorms or we just deal with milder weather. But then it looks like as we get to the meat of winter time here, the very end of January into February, we have a more favorable pattern for winter storms and maybe even a big East Coast storm early in February. But that's so far away that I just can't give you any details on it. I just want to give you a heads up as to that's kind of what the general picture looks like. Here's the GFS. This is the American. I showed you the European. GFS is pretty much in agreement with the European model. You see this storm and colder air in the southeast leading up to New Year's. And then you see colder air moving into the west again here, supplying us with unsettled weather around the 4th and 5th. As we get into this second week of January, things look more favorable for wintry weather in the eastern United States. Tough to say where exactly, but the pattern is more favorable. Then we see that cold backing off a little bit towards the middle of January, and you see more transition here, west to east storms. And this is not a super wintry looking pattern through, say, the 20th to about the 25th of January. Now, the GFS doesn't go on past the 25th, but we start to see here just a disappearance of cold for the time being. But I think we are eventually going to see some of this colder air come through here at the very end of the month of January. And then the Canadian model, we don't want to leave that one out, kind of in bed with the GFS here. Actually looks a little bit more like the European, but you can see this warm up coming around the 15th. So looks similar to the other models. Then, of course, it's a little bit faster with the thaw that's coming in the middle of January. And you can see a lot more above average heights here through about the 22nd. But interestingly, in Florida, we're not going to see any kind of extreme warmth. We're going to see fleeting cold. And with this bluer colors here, we see below average heights, meaning probably more unsettled, wetter weather here in the southeast. Maybe nothing extreme, but certainly not going to be pretty. That's actually not a bad thing after how warm and how dry it was here in the southeast over the summer and fall. Seeing this more unsettled pattern, while it's not going to be pretty, is certainly going to help us out in the longer term. So if we can get through that, then certainly we see some improvement. Here's a look at the temperature forecast. The brighter colors indicate milder than average temperatures at 850 millibars, it's a few thousand feet up. And this is we'll start with the European model, and we can see this mild air in Canada does gradually shrink, and it's colder across much of the country, with the exception of the Great Lakes and the Northeast and Eastern Canada. It's actually fairly mild, but that's what you want to see if you want to see a more active pattern over the southern United States. As we head towards the middle, that warmth does fight back here and builds back in more to the north central country. Pretty typical for El Nino. And you can see this is a bit of a thaw here right on through about the 25th, 26th of January. Then you see the cold starting to encroach again on the Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic region into the Northeast by the time we get to the very end of January and into the start of February. And that's when I think we see our best chance at maybe an East Coast storm. When you see contrasts like this, and again, this is not a slam dunk guarantee. This is just what I'm starting to fish for. When you see mild air like this across Eastern Canada, colder air across the Great Lakes, typically that contrast zone can be a favorable setup for something big to happen. But again, we're looking at something that's 35 to 40 days away. Things can certainly change. That's just what it appears to be right now. This is the American model. And again, you see how disgustingly mild it is here for Christmas, which me personally, I'm okay with as somebody who's got to travel. I mean, we had blackouts here Christmas Eve last year in North Carolina with all the cold that came down. We're not going to have to stress about that this year. So that's one good out of this. Those of you that have to pay the heating bill, this is going to be a good thing. But as we get into January, you see the cold building again in the southeast. The American model is warmer than the European, but overall shows that. And then you see the cold kind of shrinking here, and it's a little bit milder with this thaw coming. But I do think eventually we're going to transition to colder. It's going to have to be after the 25th of January if you believe the American model. And then the Canadian model here, kind of more in line with the European model. The GFS has actually done better this winter than the European and Canadian, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to be right here or not. So we'll have to wait and see. But the Canadian shows cold, especially in the West and in the central United States, the first couple of weeks of January. And then the cold kind of relaxes here with that thaw coming. But staying colder than what the other models are showing here. And I think this could end up being a little bit overdone. Here's a look at precipitation. We'll start with the European, looking pretty wet here in the southern and eastern US until we get to about the second or third. Then we get a break, and then here comes more active weather in the southeast and up the east coast around the 10th. And some of this may be frozen, as you might imagine. On the west coast, very wet, but we are going to see drier weather coming into California here later in the month. It's going to take about 4 weeks before we get rid of this very wet pattern. Very wet in the northwest through just before New Year's, and then getting dry in the northwest, meaning it'll be wetter in California for January. The northeast could be dry and cold to start, but notice how things get wetter again here in the second week of January, and then really staying kind of wet here. So I think we're going to see some rainstorms up the east coast until we start to see that colder weather meeting up with this precipitation. And this could be very interesting here, folks, towards the end of January and beginning of February for the East Coast. So stay tuned. I do think our chances are certainly better than last winter. Doesn't take much, of course, to see potentially a nor'easter with snow included here. Here's a look at the American, the GFS model, showing that we're pretty wet here, starting in the southwest, then the plains, then the East Coast, then early January turns dry and colder. But take a look at some possible mischief here over the southern United States the first week of January, and then getting wetter on the East Coast through the second and third weeks of January. And my mouse just completely disappeared or died. And for those of you watching, looks like there might have been an edit. My mouse died. I ran off to the other room, just cut the part off. But anyway, continuing here, we see some wetness over the southeastern US. So it'll probably be fairly wet here, not necessarily cold, but maybe cold enough to support some snow, I'm sure, for the third week of January, and then maybe a little bit drier. And then we'll start to see some more interesting weather potentially. And the Canadian model, more like the European, we see a drier pattern, but cold pattern in place here for the beginning of January before it gets more unsettled up the East Coast here the second week of January into the third week. And it could be really wet across the southeast. So we may actually see not only heavy rain, but some severe weather on the Gulf Coast into Florida. And then as the month wears on here, it remains wet on the East Coast. The Canadian is wetter than the other models, of course. Looking at snow, this is probably what everybody's like, I wish you would have gotten to that first, but I wanted to give you guys some background. I'm a scientist, that's what I do. But the European here shows extremely mild weather with a pretty big lack of snow cover, although we'll see some in the plains, Rockies, and Northwest, not much in the Northeast here. But as we get to the turn of the year, you'll see if you take all the European ensemble members, average them together, that line starts dropping. And we see that line dropping. It's not a guarantee that Atlanta sees snow. Some models are probably showing that, but overall, I look at the trend and things are dropping down. And as we get to the second week of January, it is definitely looking snowier for the Great Lakes Northeast. And chances are a little bit higher when you start getting into parts of the deep south. Not a guarantee, but they're higher. So this is something, if you really are concerned about it or really want to see winter, obviously I'm going to tell you to stay tuned here. I am doing some traveling for Christmas with my family. I'm not going to be on YouTube. I think family is first here, and I don't want to try to fight the Wi-Fi internet at relatives' houses. But as we get back in here to the new year, I'm obviously going to have more videos for you guys here, breaking all this down. As we get to the middle of January, there's a bit of a climb, and then take a look at the end of January into February, and certainly the Northeast looks like it's going to be game on. And maybe the Great Lakes, maybe even the Carolinas into parts of the Southeast. So that's what the European is showing. This is the American model, the GFS, and it agrees as well as you get to about the 6th or 7th of January that potential for snows dropping down a little farther south, maybe let's call it Interstate 30 or 40 at this point. And sure, some ensembles are farther south, and I'm not going to be able to guarantee where that snow is going to fall yet. I'm just showing you the overall picture here. Then the thaw coming a little bit here, and then we see gradually a drop down again here towards the 25th of January. And here's a Canadian model, which, if you remember, it was colder than the others. And so, as you can imagine, it's going to show more snow here. I don't necessarily think it's right. I think I would stick more towards the European and the American models than the Canadian. No offense if you are Canadian. I just don't think your model here is doing as great a job, but we'll see. Maybe it'll get it right this time, and I will change my belief system. We will have to see. But the Canadian's so cold, it's got some ensembles showing things down in Louisiana and South Texas. Could it happen? I mean, certainly, but looking at how wet things are going to be and how active the jet will be down here, I don't think I would certainly bet on that. Now let's take a look at our short range forecast here. We'll keep this pretty simple here. You can see east is pretty mild right now. Our big storm is impacting the southwest. Here is where that is featured, just off the California coast. You can see this conveyor belt of moisture hitting the southwest here, so very active weather in here. And another trough moving into the northwest. That's going to keep things busy up in here. But that trough is going to kick this storm through the country, and it's going to take a track here up and over this ridge that'll build into the east. That's going to lead to some winter weather up in here that eventually gets up into here. Could lead to some stronger storms down in here before Christmas, and then some wet weather on the Gulf Coast on Christmas Day, moving up the East Coast as we get to the 26th, Boxing Day, and into the 27th. But things are going to be pretty progressive, meaning we're not going to see any kind of widespread cold. We will just have a few days of cold. Flash flood watches are in effect in southern Cal and southwestern Arizona, including Phoenix, including Yuma, including Los Angeles, San Diego, and the Inland Empire. We have flood warnings as well. There was a tornado a few days ago outside of Sacramento, so the severe weather is certainly there. Now we've got to deal with some fog here. And then in the higher elevations, we have those brighter colors indicating where the winter weather is going to be a possibility. There is an excessive rain chance today and especially tonight here in the southwest, including the Sonoran Desert. Excuse me. As we head to tomorrow, that threat for heavy rain is marginal, but it includes Oklahoma City, the I-35 corridor down to San Antonio, I-45 corridor through Dallas down to Houston, and even into southwest Louisiana. A better chance for heavy rain once the Gulf gets involved here and we see more moisture. This is Christmas Eve, and most of Arkansas, Louisiana, and southern Mississippi are included in this risk for some flooding. And I'm going to break down possible rain totals here in just a little bit. On day 4, Christmas Day, unfortunately, looks pretty wet here across northern Florida, Alabama, Georgia, into the Carolinas. This area does need the rain. It's not going to be a pretty Christmas. I'm planning to do a drive on Christmas morning to see my Atlanta family. So we'll do Christmas Eve here in Raleigh, then we'll be there. It's going to be pretty much a car wash the entire way down, unfortunately. And then as we get to the 26th, right after Christmas, pretty wet all the way up into the mid-Atlantic region, including Philly, Harrisburg, and the Susquehanna River Valley. And I think the Northeast sees it on the 27th as well. Unfortunately, here's the European model. We'll roll through this real quick for you guys. But you'll see the southwest storm comes through, and we start picking up this moisture here on the 23rd here across Texas. On the 24th, very wet from Louisiana straight up to Minnesota. But interestingly here, this low pressure system is a little faster, but then the cold air wraps up behind it. And on Christmas Day, rather than it being dry here in places like Omaha, I don't know what happened there, we actually see this second wave come up and could produce some heavier snow in eastern Nebraska, northeast Kansas, maybe St. Joe's, Missouri, all the way up into southwest Minnesota. And then Christmas night, we could see a switch over to some ice and some snow around Minneapolis and points just west. So could be an interesting little snowstorm for those of us in Nebraska. It's not going to be super cold, but this will be more of a wet snow that could produce some trouble. And then on the East Coast, you can see quite a bit of rain here, the 26th into the 27th, a little bit of lead out frozen precip into northern Maine into Atlantic Canada. You can see a little snow here as well, followed by colder weather with lake effect snows later next week, Thursday, Friday into Saturday in the usually favored spots here east of this trough axis. So Lake Erie and Lake Ontario primarily. And then as we get after that, this is New Year's Eve, and it doesn't look super unsettled. It'll be chilly in the east. We'll see some mountain snow, but this is about as quiet as a weather map as you might expect here for New Year's Eve. So that should be pretty good for most of you guys. Here's the American model, the GFS, and it's going to differ some from the European, but you can see here all of our moisture building over the southern and central U.S. This one has quite a bit of snow Christmas afternoon and night here in western Iowa into Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and eastern Nebraska. It's a little more progressive than the European. It also shows a big storm moving into the west, but the timing on it is a little bit slower, and that heavy rain waits till nighttime. There'll be heavy snow across the Canadian Rockies into the Cascade Mountains here, but it may wait till later in the day or at night. Some timing challenges on that. In the east, it's going to be wet the 26th into the 27th. Not a repeat of last weekend, but still pretty wet, unfortunately, for us here. And then the cold does move in behind it. And we see a bit of an upper level low producing some instability snows, even down into East Tennessee and Kentucky here later on next week with lake effect snow over parts of the Great Lakes. But here's New Year's Eve. And again, relatively speaking, this is about as quiet as a weather map as you might expect here in the U.S. It'll be chilly in the east, moderating temperatures in the southern plains, and a little bit chilly across the west, but pretty quiet here for New Year's Eve. Here's a look at potential snow as we get past that. And I do want to show you some interesting scenarios that the GFS has been spitting out. It's got a little bit of snow here over the Ohio Valley into the Appalachians here behind this on the 27th into the early 28th. Then a break, and then it's trying to spit out some storms after New Year's here over the mid-Atlantic states. And then it's got something else coming through on the 4th and 5th. If it were up to me, I would not even run the GFS past day 7 or 8 because these are all fantasy storms. But it's been latching on to the potential here for something here to happen farther south than what we've seen in a while. This one doesn't have as much in the Ohio Valley. This is the run after it. But you can see it does try to bring some winter weather across the central and eastern U.S. Leading up to the 4th and 5th. So it's got something here, but it certainly differs with each model run. Here is the 18Z from yesterday. This one not as impressive. It's got snow farther north across the Ohio Valley into the mid-Atlantic states, but it's still showing something here. And then a look at the 0Z model, and you will see more snow showing up now across Tennessee and North Carolina towards the 28th and 29th, then a break, and then a southern snow potential for the 1st and 2nd here, but nothing for the mid-Atlantic region. And then the latest model run shows still some possible snow over the Ohio Valley here, the 28th into the 29th, ending on the 30th, then a break, and then it's got a little bit of snow from Alabama into North Carolina. So the bottom line is none of these models is going to be accurate because we're talking about something that's more than 10 days away. But all of them have been showing something sneaking through here after the 1st of the year, something we're going to start watching for. So my title is not incorrect. There's certainly some cold and snow possible here. But the big question mark is, do we actually get a real storm or do we just get something that quickly fades through here and sets the table for more active weather after that? And I don't know the answer yet, so stay tuned on that one. Here's a look at the Northwest. Quite a bit of rain coming here, especially on the 25th and 26th. We could see amounts getting over 5 inches down in the Northern Cal, 3 to 4 inches. Here's a look at Northern Cal a little bit closer here. You can see rain totals starting to climb here by next Tuesday and Wednesday, with amounts of 1 to 3 inches possible, more on the coast and in the coastal ranges. In the Southwest, we're going to see quite a bit of snow as well. Or, well, in the mountains we will, but quite a bit of rain. Over an inch in Phoenix, some flooding will be possible here. A lot of this is going to happen later today into tonight. Tucson could see over an inch as well. And that should be it right up through Christmas. So really the next 24 hours will be our biggest problems. And you'll see there is a potential for some stronger storms in here as well. Certainly some heavy rain. Sorry, this is so slow, but we'll see this moisture building here in the Southwest. And we could see a few thunderstorms here tomorrow leading up into the afternoon hours. So there could be a little severe weather around the Phoenix and Tucson areas into the early evening, then just a few leftover showers heading into Saturday morning. You'll see there's some severe potential here, some helicity turning in the atmosphere, most of it over southern Arizona into southwestern New Mexico. So this could be a little bit of a severe weather outbreak. The majority of these problems are going to be tomorrow afternoon into, or I should say this afternoon into this evening here. South central U.S. going to see some heavy rain as well. It starts building here Saturday night and especially on Christmas Eve Sunday. Potentially 2 inches of rain around Dallas, 2 inches around Beaumont and New Orleans, 1 to 2 inches around Little Rock into western Missouri. A lot of this is going to come, unfortunately, as a lot of folks are getting out to do Christmas-related activities. And then we see on the radar here, we'll start to see some stronger storms in New Mexico tomorrow morning, moving into West Texas tomorrow afternoon, and especially tomorrow evening. There may be some severe weather, so be on the lookout for some stronger storms with hail and strong winds tomorrow afternoon across West Texas. And then as that moves east, the threat for severe weather should start to wane, but we could still see some gusty wind and heavy rain here for later Saturday night. There is some helicity here to watch for some potential severe weather. Right now, just a marginal risk, but I think we could have a slight risk according to the HER model here in West Texas and eastern New Mexico, most of that coming here tomorrow evening. Rain in the southeast, we're going to be seeing that moving in here on Christmas Eve, and it's going to pick up on Christmas Day. Amounts generally 1 to 2 inches, but we could see locally 3 somewhere here in the Pisgah Forest as well as on the central Gulf Coast. Florida, you're not going to see as much rain on the peninsula. I know you need it, but after last weekend, I think the break will be welcome. And I think it stays that way through the end of the year. So bowl games should not be too bad and too wet here, as overall we're looking at less than an inch of rain, maybe even less than that. In the Ohio Valley, we're going to see a little bit of rain here with this first system moving through this weekend, and more rain coming Monday into Tuesday, Christmas Day, pretty wet. Could see a couple of inches around Kansas City, around an inch in St. Louis and Chicago, less than that across Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. Some of this liquid will turn to snow as we get towards the 29th and 30th. Looking a little bit farther north, we're going to see some Great Lakes rain here coming. And most of our rain comes on Christmas Day in Minnesota and Wisconsin, moving in Christmas night to the UP of Michigan and the 26th into Michigan and Ontario. Here's a look at the Northeast. Relatively quiet. We'll see some light rain moving through Christmas Eve, but not a lot. But most of our rain comes Monday night and especially Tuesday into Wednesday. And overall amounts look like they're going to be, generally speaking, an inch or so. Don't think we're going to see another 5 or 6 inch rainfall, but with rivers being high in New England, still be on the lookout for the possibility of flooding. And then looking at the wintry part of the storm, significant snow over Colorado and Wyoming. Take a look, though, at what's happening in Nebraska and South Dakota. See an inch or two around Lincoln and Omaha. According to the blend of the models. Iowa will also see some of this snow as well, potentially a couple of inches in the Northwest. And then we see potentially some wintry weather here later next week with amounts generally less than an inch, except across the mountains of North Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Virginia, where higher amounts are expected here later next week. And in the Northeast, we may see a little bit of snow here with this weak clipper coming through here. But generally speaking, not a lot of snow until we get to later next week, Thursday and especially Friday, a few inches possible, and Saturday, maybe several inches around New Brunswick, northern Maine, and eastern parts of Quebec. But overall, this is pretty paltry for snow through the rest of this year. We're going to have to wait till we get into January to see our better chances for snow. So I apologize for the edit here. Stuff happens, but I hope you guys have a wonderful Christmas. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please consider becoming a subscriber, as more videos will be coming, breaking down what should be a pretty active January, I think, for many of us. With the end credits, I give all the credit to God. As a Christian man, this is my calling. This is my gift from God to you guys, is the weather. But basically, I really do think that the reason for the season is hope. That's Jesus Christ. He was born allegedly on Christmas Day. Let's just say that. But regardless of what we can argue all day about when he was born, but what we know is that Jesus brings hope to us in a time that can be very difficult. We have long to-do lists this time of the year. I'm in sales. I'm still trying to hit a goal, even though we're heading into the end of the year. The pressure is on to perform here. The pressure is on to get gifts, to get with family, to fight off sickness, to travel. A lot of people are in the airlines right now trying to travel. But I want you guys to just take a break from that pressure and realize that with all this stress, there is good news coming. And that's Jesus is coming again. He was born as a gift from God to seek and save that which was lost. Luke 19:10 says, "For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost." Before I was a Christian, I was a lost person who put all of my worth in what my friends and family thought and how much money I made, what my employers thought. And it was super, super, super triggering and tiring. And I just felt worthless. But thank the Lord that people came into my life who were able to have some real conversations with me, people that had joy in their life, people had God in their life that were able to kind of show me that there is another way. And I'm not here to convert you today. I'm just here to share my story. But Jesus came at Christmas to seek and save people like me, people like you. And whether or not you choose to believe in him is not up to me to decide. I'm not going to give you a hard time over it, but I did want to share what it means to me, that our Lord Jesus Christ did not come into the world for himself. He came to help out those of us who were lost, those of us who maybe were seeking for something better. Nothing for him, none of his gain, but it's to give all for us. And he is the reason that we are celebrating the season, no matter what you see on the TV, no matter what the holiday traditions you may have in your family. But the real reason is Jesus Christ. You can't have Christmas without Christ. And I wanted to share that good news with you because you may be somebody who's lost today, who doesn't have joy in your life. And you can certainly see that there is joy in Jesus Christ. I ask you, if you are a person who wants to be prayed for, I will pray for you to the end of time, because I believe prayer truly does help. Talking to God helps, letting him know who's on our mind, people that may be believers and who are suffering, and people who may not be believers. So if you have a prayer request, don't be ashamed to share that with me. I'm happy to pray for you. And I will be praying for those of you who come to me who still have not made that commitment or not made that choice, and who may never not make that choice. But just know that our Lord came here not for himself, but instead to help those of us who are lost. And that includes Christians. We're all lost. We're lost people, but our home is heaven. And if we've chosen Jesus Christ, we will one day be able to live in heaven with him. And that is the great news I wanted to share with you today. Hope you guys have a Merry Christmas, and we'll catch up here probably right before New Year's, if not at the beginning of next year. Take care.